Okay, we have a few people still trailing in, but I think we should probably go ahead and get started. Welcome to this session of Epiphanies of Beauty. We're going to hear from William Schickel and Gregory Wolfe this afternoon. We'll begin with William Schickel, who has some slides for us as well. Schickel is an artist. He has created a vast body of work over the past 50 years, including painting, stained glass, sculptures, furniture, architecture, and industrial designs. I'll just mention a few. You may have noticed the artwork on this year's brochure. That is William Schickel's painting, and it's hanging out here in the hallway. When I was designing this year's brochure, actually, I was carrying around Gregory Wolfe's book called Sacred Passion, The Art of William Schickel, and I'd been looking at it for some time. And as it so happened, I was coming up here to work on the brochure, and the week before that, I'd been in Kentucky and had visited the Abbey at Gethsemane, and Schickel is also responsible for the renovations, the quite beautiful work in that designing that Abbey, and I had not realized that, but when I came here and opened the book and looked at it, it seemed like it just had to be the case that this was the sort of perfect coincidence, and this painting struck me immediately as the appropriate one for this conference. His works are widely exhibited, and some of them, in fact, are included in the Vatican collection. He attended the University of Notre Dame, where he came under the influence of Frank O'Malley and Yves Simon, who in turn introduced him to the bracing cultural vision of Jacques Maritain. And Maritain's beliefs that religious art, to be authentic, must flow from the strong cultural currents of the age touched him deeply. And he also served formative apprenticeships to Eugene Cormandi and Emile Frey. So there are a lot of different influences in his work, and I look forward to seeing some of it today with you all. You can also learn about his life and work in the book Sacred Passion that I just mentioned, The Art of William Schickel, which is available on Amazon and many different libraries. So I'll turn the session over to him now.
Thank you. I would like to thank the Center for Ethics and Culture for inviting me to speak. And I'd like to thank Katie Fredoso for looking after me and inviting me personally. 60 years plus ago, I received a degree from Notre Dame with the amusing title, Unmarried Man in the Fine Arts, bachelor's degree. As you will see in the first slide that I show, that this is where I got my start as a working artist. My indebtedness to Notre Dame University is profound. Three great teachers come to mind. Tom Stritch, my freshman English teacher and friend. He impressed indelibly in my brain the phrase, "Give and it will be given to you, pressed down and running over." That was a wonderful launching from my youth. And there was Frank O'Malley, the notable English teacher who opened up the feast of great literature to me. And Yves Simon, the profound teacher of ethics who introduced me to the life-shaping truths of Jacques Maritain's philosophy of art, more commonly known as art and scholasticism. Maritain taught me that art is a virtue of the practical intellect, a key concept for the working artist because it's only perfected by practice. I would like to speak to you about the actual creation of Epiphanies of Beauty, which is what John Paul II has called us artists to do. Among this company of scholars, I speak to you as a workman artist. I have spent a long lifetime attempting to show forth and manifest beauty through the visual arts. I believe that beauty could be summed up as the splendor of form shining through matter. Thank you.
Could you just get your mouth close to it? Could you just put your mouth close to it?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not an experienced speaker. I believe that beauty can be summed up as the splendor of form shining through matter, as noted by Aristotle and Aquinas. Through the ages, the dynamic interaction or marriage of an inspired vision of work to be made and the ability and talent and training and discipline of an artist capable of giving physical form has been the catalyst for beautiful, inspired works of art over history. From the culture of antiquity to the glory of Egyptian pyramids and sculpture, to the splendors of Greece and Rome and the wonders of the Middle Ages, even now, large public works are a kind of expression of communal culture. The vision of the work to be made is normally coming from a patron who represents the needs of the community. The creation of the work is done by artists, designers, architects, and artisans. In our own time, since the rise of individualism and the ardent seeking of self-expression, we now have art galleries. My many works were created through the vision of what is to be created and the creation of the work from the same artist. Such great men as Braque, Picasso, Matisse, Rothko, to name a few. My own works are of both kinds, large public commissions expressing the vision of the community, which I am part, and smaller works expressing a personal vision. Whether the work is public or private, the goal is to create an epiphany of beauty, a work where the splendor of form shines through matter. I would like to show you a few slides of my own work, examples both of private and public work. And I just feel I need to tell you that I'm experienced enough to know that showing work at a conference may well get very mixed responses. I'm sure being faithful to the virtue of scholarship can at times be very costly. At the same time, it is certainly true of being faithful to the virtue of art. The communities that I have worked for and with to create the public works have been deeply satisfied. The work has been widely published and shown in galleries and museums. However, you should know that in these times of cultural warfare, part of the religious community and part of the academic community have been very hostile to these works. Some of the things that I will show you have been used to illustrate a book called Ugly as Sin. Some has caused me to be called a cultural whore here at the conference in Notre Dame at one time. I have lived in the Cincinnati Archdiocese for 57 years and have never received a major archdiocesan commission. I mention these things to you to recognize the balance that exists between the resurrection and the crucifixion in life if you are seeking the transcendentals, goodness, truth, and beauty. Joseph, we can put the lights down.
Okay, this worked before. Excuse me. Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Thank you. This is of the drinking fountain at the grotto. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. It was my senior project 60 plus years ago. Next. There are three sculptures relating Christ to water. This is the Samaritan woman at the well. Next. And this shows the fountain in relationship to the prayer life of the people. Next. That shows the Samaritan woman at the well. Next. And here you have Christ calming the storm. The next thing that I would like to talk about is the Grailville Oratory. Back in the 60s, Grailville, a community of dynamic Catholic women, had the vision to create a beautiful contemporary place of prayer and worship to serve their needs. My job was to give physical form to that vision as economically as possible. On the property was a 100-year-old dairy barn that had become obsolete for their current cultural life. Putting these two realities together meant that the spacious hayloft of the former dairy barn would become the Grailville Oratory. It turned out to be the first worship space in the United States designed for mass facing the people. 3 years before the conclusion of Vatican II, it was dedicated by Archbishop Alter. You come in through a narrow, low entry, and then it opens up into a wide expanse. Next. Most of the credit for this goes to some farmers who hewed these beams out of the forest and had no idea that they were building a cathedral. Next. Just to show you the wonderful woodwork that was built, constructed, which has a beautiful rhythm. And the clear story lights have a great purpose. Next. Here you see the pattern of light that they put on the wall as the sun goes from east to west. It moves around the whole oratory. Early one morning, I heard a knock at the door of my barn studio, and it was two monks from Gethsemane. They said that in celebration of the 100th anniversary of the monastery, they wanted to remodel the monastery church, and they wanted to do it in the light of Vatican II. They said that they wanted to do it in a way that reflected the inspiration of the Holy Spirit in their own time. They asked me if I would be interested to work with them as designer and artist to give physical form to their vision. Well, the blessings of clients like that are rare, so I said I'd be honored and delighted. I was to go to work with a committee of 8 monks. One of the joys of that committee was that Thomas Merton was one of those monks. Slide. This shows you the interior of the monastery church before the renovation. And it is apparent that the exterior of the building and the interior were quite unrelated. By crawling up in the attic space above the ceilings that you see there, you could see the substantial brick walls. They were made of handmade bricks created over 100 years ago by the monks from the local clay, thick walls. Spanning these walls were massive wood beams, the wrought iron connectors forged in the blacksmith shop of the monastery. Inside that basic building, this nostalgic setting had been created as an imitation neo-Gothic interior, constructed totally of lath and plaster. It had no relationship to the structure of the building. This same community, a century later, approved the idea of simply removing the plaster and lath and working with the inherent beauty of the structure. Many years later, that daring decision is still giving inspiration to many. Next. That shows the beauty of the deep recessed walls, how they relate to the stained glass. Over the centuries, excuse me, one more. Next. This gives you a little closer vision of the sanctuary area, and you can see the abbot's chair there. Over the centuries, this daring, and it shows what work can be done with people of such courage. Over the centuries, this creative daring has actually been the tradition of the Catholic Church, ever ancient, ever new, as St. Augustine says. Next, I would like to show you the Bellarmine Chapel at Xavier University in Cincinnati. Recently, we did a renovation of this chapel, built in the late 60s. This shows the setting for Advent, and one of the features of this renovation was a large icon of the seasons. It's a new type of icon that has changeable images. Here you see the setting for Advent with showing the Jewish tradition out of which Christ came and looking toward the Star of Bethlehem for anticipating the birth of Jesus on Christmas. Next. And here you see Easter morning, a beautiful copper brass sunlight coming up and the people particularly love this Easter image. It's a new type of icon. It has changeable images, and they give visual expression, illuminating the text of a particular liturgical season. And both for the liturgy and private prayer, the people find this very helpful. Next, I would like to show you the Mercy Health and Wellness Center. For many years, the Sisters of Mercy have offered a large network of hospitals for healing. Recently, they've taken a bold new step by developing health and wellness centers, stressing health and wellness through body, mind, and spirit. They're trying to cut down the hospital population. They're culturally stimulating places, aesthetically beautiful, and they provide classrooms, meeting rooms, counseling rooms, workspace, cafe, chapel, simulating works of art, along with all the physical fitness equipment, gyms and pools and such things. The Sisters of Mercy, though, are a Catholic religious order doing these works of mercy as followers of Christ. And permeating these facilities, they wanted to provide a cultural statement that proclaims their motivation, a kind of cultural evangelization, they called it. Because they serve as a universal clientele, they wanted to do this in culturally broad visual vocabulary. And they asked me if I would work with them as designer and artist to give physical expression within an already existing building. I found it very challenging. Next. Here you see what is called the totem of salvation. Some people have questioned the use of the totem for the Catholic religion, but you have to realize that the totem was originally invented in Egypt to show their devotion to their God. And it's simply using an ancient form and bringing it into the Christian era. It starts in a pool of water down on the floor below, and then you see the entryway coming in under the stained glass windows, and it goes up 35 feet and through telling the life of Christ. At the top you have the burial and the resurrection. Next. This shows you the top of the totem with the scene of the burial and the sunrise of the resurrection. These facilities serve whole communities. All faith, races, and ages. Families come here together. The Sisters of Mercy, have I read this? The Sisters of Mercy are a Catholic religious order doing their works of mercy as followers of Christ. and permeating these facilities, they wanted to provide a cultural statement that proclaims their motivation in Christ's evangelization. Because they serve a universal clientele, they wanted to do this in culturally broad visual vocabulary. So things like the totem were very acceptable. That's stained glass window honoring earth, sky, water, sun, and family. Next, I would like to talk to you about the Miami Valley Hospital Chapel. Today, hospitals, both in patients and staff, are intercultural, and interfaith clientele goes to these hospitals. And the need for interfaith chapels is increasingly recognized. Next. Miami Valley Hospital hired me to design such a chapel for them to serve Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, and other faith seekers of the transcendent. The stress was on universal symbols that all can relate to. Fire tiled clay, a metaphor of the earth for the floor, a big flowing pool of water, the primary colors reflected from the light in the stained glass windows, and a direct light from the sky flooding the altar. There are candles, menorah, prayer rugs, and other accessories for the various rituals. Next. The place is designed so it accommodates to various sizes. You have this inner circle around the altar, and then by bringing up the artificial lighting, both out to the left, to the front, and to the side, there's more seating. So you can vary the space from about 16 chairs to 40 or 250. The next thing I would like to show you is a mural we very recently completed at St. John Newman Church in Canton, Michigan. And the mural is called Journeying with Christ. The vision of the parish was to send people who had been united in Christ in the Eucharist, send them forth into their secular environment with a spirit of compassion. To do this, they wanted a large mural called The Journey with Christ, illustrating Christ's works of mercy. This mural is on the rear wall. You don't see it coming into the church. You see it when you're leaving the church. And it was very challenging to do this, but working together, we came up with 8 examples of Christ's compassion, such as feeding the hungry, washing the feet, calming the storm. And these were executed in materials compatible with the architecture of the building: wood, copper, brass, and paint. And these slides were taken during the execution of the mural. This shows Christ gathering the children to him. Next, this shows calming the storm. And you'll notice there's a path of light path running through that in all these photographs. Part of the mural is not up yet. So in that path, going toward the door, are footsteps made of brass and copper leading toward the door to suggest to the people that you take these things with you out into the rest of your life. Next. This is raising Lazarus from the tomb. I would like next to show you, excuse me, go one more. It's a married woman at the well. One more. This shows Nick Farr, who has been working with me over many years, and he's an artist, and that gives you a little sense of the scale of this work. He's working on one of the panels. Next. Now I want to talk to you about Spring Morning. Spring Morning is one of those works where I am both the patron and the artist. Here I wanted to show not the portrait of the Spring Morning, but a semi-abstract expression of it in liquid enamel. And it kind of is meant to give the sense of the power and the glory of the Spring Morning, but to keep the integrity of the paint used. Another group that I want to show you is called Two in One Flesh. This is a group of paintings I'm currently working on, and it's about marriage, and the group is called Two in One Flesh. This particular painting is also called Two in One Flesh. On the right you see the husband, and on the left you see, am I telling you wrong? On the left you see the husband, on the right you see the wife, and in their union comes forth a child, two in one flesh. My vision as patron is a symbolic representation of the intimacy and love of sacramental marriage. My desire as an artist was to do this in a way that would respect the intrinsic beauty of the particular medium used. That's the embrace. The use of spontaneous poured liquid enamel within a very planned framework is a medium I like very much because it reflects life at its best, where you live an ordered existence, and yet you dance and do things that are very spontaneous. Next, this is called a kiss. Next. And sharing a book, showing that married life is not just a physical sharing, but it's also an intellectual sharing. This is sharing a book, reading together, something Mary and I do every morning. With that, Joe, I think we could turn up the lights. In conclusion, over the years, many people have been asking me a question: what kind of artist are you? And I've had a hard time answering that question. What I hope is that I'm a metaphysical realist. My hope is to produce works of many kinds, works that serve the universal craving for the good, the true, and the beautiful. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I should warn you, I've got a hearing disability, so I'll have to work with that.
I think we'll hear from Gregory Wolfe and then have questions at the end, if you will, of his talk. He's going to, since you've already been introduced to Gregory on Thursday night, I will keep my introductory remarks rather brief. Gregory Wolfe is the publisher and editor of Image and the director of the Center for Religious Humanism. And he also serves as writer-in-residence and director of the MFA in Creative Writing program at Seattle Pacific University.
Thank you. It's a great honor for me to be able to be here to celebrate Bill Schickel's work in this location, this place, this alma mater that formed him and shaped him so powerfully, as he himself told us just a few moments ago. I've often thought that if I could have cloned Bill Schickel 60 years ago and put one of him in each state in the Union, that we would have avoided a great deal of the liturgical and aesthetic disasters that have struck us as a culture and as a church over the last half century. Writing the book Sacred Passion, The Art of William Schickel, was a great experience for me. It was a chance to experience a man and his work as a concrete nexus of forces and influences that meant a great deal to me. In Bill Schickel's work, you see a wholeness. And I know that word wholeness is something of a cliche. It's all too easy to talk about unity or wholeness in rather vapid or saccharine terms. But for me, it has been absolutely the key to understanding his work. Wholeness in a whole variety of ways. One of the things to understand about the way Bill Schickel's work has emerged into the world is that it emerges out of a very concrete set of circumstances, ultimately grounded in family and faith. The Schickel family has a rich experience of life together as a family, grounded in their Catholic faith. They have a liturgical life, not just in Mass attendance, but in prayer and song around the table. This is something that has grown out of their German Catholic heritage, and is truly an inspiring thing. And very few people get a chance to peek inside that domestic front, but it is truly the source and locus of the work that comes out and is seen into the larger world through the medium of the public realm. But more than that, a whole series of forces battling modern fragmentation and individualism and ideology were forces that the Schickels seized as healing and wholesome in the deepest sense of the word. Bill alluded to a few of these forces, in particular the neo-Thomism of thinkers like Jacques Maritain, Étienne Gilson, Yves Simon, which was an attempt, as many of you know, to synthesize the thought of Thomas Aquinas for the modern era, not to simply replicate it, but to synthesize it with modern circumstances. And there's something both very ancient and very modern about the best Thomist thought. People like Maritain and Gilson, as deeply indebted as they were to this figure of the Middle Ages, were among the great champions of modern art within the church and within larger society. It's something people often forget about them. They think of them as perhaps having strong philosophical dimension, even a political dimension, as resisting certain trends in society and church. But they were hardly fuddy-duddies when it came to the arts. Maritain and Gilson both championed modernism as an important recovery of the meaning and the essence of art. For example, Gilson, in his book Painting and Reality, argued that the modern revolution in art, beginning roughly with Manet and Cézanne in the late 19th century, was a wonderful rebellion against the tradition of realism that he felt was indebted to modern empirical thought, modern scientific. He takes a stand very much the reverse of what many of us seem to be educated into, that the great works of the Renaissance and up through the 19th century are the wholesome, wonderful, human, traditional way of making art. And Gilson said, this is not true. This emphasis on more literal photographic representation reacts use of itself as a medium to get at the metaphysical, to get beyond the surface level. And in the modern revolution in art, Gilson argued, art was freed up again to be what it should be, a metaphysical medium, a medium that transcends the world as we see it, while, of course, referring to it in a whole variety of ways. So again, this ancient and new synthesis in these great Neotomists is something that Bill took to heart in a very, very profound way. It's a way, frankly, as you may have guessed, perhaps from some of the things I said on Thursday night, that a lot of people within the church in particular, I think, have failed to grasp, have failed to engage. It's ironic that many people who consider themselves hyper-traditionalists are in fact embracing a tradition that is conditioned by the modern scientific revolution against the classical Christian synthesis. Now, that's not to say that I hate Michelangelo. It's not in any way, shape, or form to denigrate the great works that have come out of that tradition. But there is a kind of miseducation out there that is prevalent in very traditional religious circles, and Bill Schickel's work is an opportunity for people to re-educate themselves to a new and deeper sense of what art is all about. And so another synthesis in his work, a wholeness, is this wholeness which embraces the possibilities of modern abstraction, of high modernism. The idea that in a world in which the machine and the media and technology dominate, that some of the older forms of looking at the world and ornamenting the world, while beautiful in and of themselves and perhaps timeless in their way, but ultimately rooted in another time, in another cultural circumstance, not our own. So what modernism did was to kind of, in the clutter of modernity, to say less is more, to strip down to purer forms, and to gain a sense of the meaning of things and the power of shape and form and material at a time when we were bombarded with an overdose of imagery in a variety of ways. And so that Mies van der Rohe motto, less is more, applies in a whole variety of ways to Bill's work. We didn't see he had only a short time today, but you see his portrait of Maritain out there by the door. There's a wonderful example of how a portrait, a personality, can be conveyed sometimes more powerfully by semi-abstraction than by a literal depiction of every pore on a person's face. The idea of the artist in relationship to the community is also a very ancient and very new one in Bill's handling of it. He's been very indebted in his life to the great French Catholic painter Georges Rouault, who was a man who synthesized medieval stained glass techniques with modern fauvism to come up with perhaps the most powerful Catholic vision in painting in the modern era. One of the things that Rouault felt very strongly about was that the modern romantic cult of the artist as genius was deeply injurious both to the artist's soul and the artist's work and to the relationship between the artist and the community. Today, again, we inherit a kind of mythology that we sort of, many of us at least are three-quarters convinced by, that the artist is the genius, the fiery, brilliant, the Beethoven with the wild hair and thundering, power of his personal essence, who's there to shock, whose campaigns of shock and awe are there to discomfort us and blow us away. Bill was unconvinced by this notion of the artist as romantic prophet, and has long believed that an artist is very much a part of a community, and that an artist can maintain his identity and his integrity and individuality while remaining in dialogue, while remaining a sense of being a participant and not merely a speaker to or preacher to or hander down of thunderous wisdom from above. And so again, you see how he listens above all to what his commissioners are saying and finds a solution that remains distinctively a Schickel work and yet speaks to the community itself. So he has found it impossible in his life to enter into some of the fragmentations and divisions that we somehow often take for granted. You can see in his work that he refuses to split the sacred and the profane. His work comes out of the most ordinary things. I mean, how many artists do you know who create a series of paintings about marriage? I mean, it's, again, there's something radical about this, but radical in the deepest sense of the word, going back to the root. The sun, earth, bread, grapes, boats. These are the most humble of ordinary things that become the essence of his symbology. Nor does he feel liturgy should be separate from life, that liturgy should be some kind of hieratic, abstracted world of images, but should, again, grow out of the ordinary. And so he exemplifies, I think, a person with a passionate interest in the lay apostolate, in the layman as a vibrant part of the church community. And I think the story of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati never commissioning him is a scandal. I mean, I think it's one of those things that wounds me and ought to wound all of us, that there be such a dichotomy between liturgy and life, between liturgy and the most vibrant forms of contemporary art. Nor can he stay in one medium. He works in about 30 different mediums. He's an architectural designer. He creates these spaces. He works in 3 dimensions when he creates these beautiful light wells, as you've seen, such as the light well that comes down in the Grailvale Oratory or in the chapel, where he channels the light down over a central altar area. He works in paint. He works in sculpture. He loves the beauty of the materials themselves and reminds us that the materials are part of the meaning of the work, not merely something to become transparent, but the beauty and the goodness of the physical stuff of this world is something to relish while you're relishing the larger symbolic or narrative meanings of a work. To me, this is sacramental and Catholic in the deepest sense. His life also has grown out of a belief in closeness to the land and to charity, 2 things very deeply related in Grailville. This lay Catholic apostolate for women, founded by women, that caused him to move to Loveland, Ohio in the first place. Those women were influenced in turn by an agrarian movement, which is a very powerful movement in the 20th century. Again, it's not exactly the most popular thing on the planet, but the Southern agrarians were great thinkers and writers of the 20th century, and today another great Southern agrarian, Wendell Berry, represents a vision very similar to what the Schickels wanted to do, living on the land and living in close relationship to the land. The Catholic worker movement, the whole idea of kind of direct social apostolate, and in ways that cherish simplicity, is something that has gone into Schickel's work and art. I would also argue that he's also deeply influenced by jazz. If you look at some of those drip paintings, you see his fascination for the relationship between order and spontaneity, between structure and the individual expressive response to a situation. And so you have that lovely jazz logic of certain chord progressions and structures along with improvisation and spontaneity. So synthesis, wholeness, unity are absolutely at the core of Bill's work, and they serve as a model for artists. And I'm hoping and praying that artists around the country who care about faith will look to Bill and see him as a model, and as the Bible says, go and do likewise. Thank you for your attention.
We have time for questions now. I would encourage you, if you have a question, to please come to one of the mics. There are 2 at the balcony and 2 down here at the front so that we can hear you. And please let us know to whom your question is addressed.
Mr. Schickel, I was wondering, Greg was mentioning the light wells, as he called them. Is that kind of a connection to more of a baldachin, and is it within the worship space? How exactly did you come to that kind of a form?
He's asking about the light wells. He's saying, are they at all like the baldachin idea, and how do they function in the worship service?
I think that's a very interesting question, because they are kind of the opposite, one being a tent and the other being in touch with the sky. But they serve the same purpose. It's like being married under a canopy. It's a canopy of light rather than a canopy of fabric. I think it's a very interesting question. Thank you.
And the light well is a beautiful way of literally yoking liturgy and life between the inside and the outside of a liturgical space, and doing it in a way that's unobtrusive and mysterious. That light comes not directly, but it shimmers down. So it's a perfect incarnation of that interest.
What was it like to work with Thomas Merton?
What was it like to work with Thomas Merton?
Well, excuse me. In those days, he wasn't so formidably famous, and he was very helpful, though, on being on the committee, because he understood a number of things that the other monks didn't understand, who had not had the personal experience with the fine arts that he had had. So he was a very supportive and helpful guy, and at the end of the project, he wrote a very nice tribute to it.
If I can just jump in, one of the things that he said about what Bill did there was that as severe as that space is in its perpendicularity and plainness, Merton stressed that this is, in fact, if you go back to the medieval Cistercian architecture, it is, in the terms of that era, incredibly severe and low-key and plain and geometric compared to other styles of the time. And so he celebrated it for reconnecting with the true Cistercian spirit in a way that faux Gothic architecture, while it's a beautiful, allusion to a tradition, just did not.
From the time I was in 3rd grade until I finished college, I grew up in a parish in which mass-produced housing was connected with the mass production of gymnasium-style churches. And that church now is just being replaced about 55 years later. As we see parishes close, many of the ones that are closing are ethnic parish churches of very traditional design, and what's being left is in many cases parishes that were built in a very inferior architectural plan, and sometimes to create low maintenance buildings. How do we avoid having the same mistakes made over again as parishes close and consolidate? The members of the parish, the lay people, seem to have very little influence on the corporate decisions about buildings, which are made by dioceses. How do we get through to people who seem to care nothing about this?
I'm not sure I know a whole lot more about it than you do, but I would say that it's amazing to me I suffer from seeing parishes that had been places of tremendous light. I think of a particular one in Cincinnati, and the neighborhood around it was all Catholic. They all walked to church, and now that's not there. So for a diocese to maintain it is technically almost impossible. It's not the main reason, and maybe unfortunate, that the so-called gym-like church is surviving is that's where the people are, and they move to the suburbs, and that's where they gather. And there are beautiful ones of that kind too, and many ugly ones. There are also beautiful old ones and many very superficial old ones.
Can I speak from this? Is this microphone turned on? Yeah, okay. First, Bill, I wanted to call attention to your extraordinary background. That last question by Bill Kishore, who was also a student of Frank O'Malley's and had many of the same influences you did at Notre Dame. He is one of the leading medical researchers in this country teaching at Brown University. You're an artist in the darkest parts of Ohio. And it does speak to something about Frank O'Malley's amazing experience in that whole atmosphere here at Notre Dame inspired by Neo-Thomism. And I wonder if you would just say a word, more detail about, a little more in detail about the influence you felt. And in particular, I know Peter Morin came through Notre Dame quite a lot, staying with people like Willis Nutting here in the 40s. Were you influenced by Morin more particularly in the agrarian movement, and also later in your career as Neo-Thomism as a major intellectual influence in our culture declined after that wonderful flourishing in the 30s and 40s? Did you continue to draw inspiration from Neo-Thomism, or did you move on to other intellectual influences? If you can comment on any of those matters.
I'm sure that in one sense I moved on to other intellectual influences, but I have to say that I still find the Maritain point of view much more unfailingly correct than what I find in general.
This question builds on the last question, actually. I'm curious, looking back at your career, and perhaps some of the changes of influence that you've experienced, would you have any retractions artistically?
He's asking if there's anything you would, any retractions you would have, any changes that you would make to anything you've done.
That's almost an embarrassing question. Probably, if I went back and looked at them, I would do that. In general, though, I will say that the people we have done the work for are extremely satisfied with it over a course of many years. And you don't now, I can't now approach it very objectively, but my guess is that if I could, I'd change some things.
I was wondering if you could comment on your thoughts concerning the placement of the tabernacle or tabernacle design in relationship to the altar area in the worship spaces that you designed.
He's asking about the placement of the tabernacle in relationship to the altar and various of your designs. What your thoughts are about that?
I think that's a good question. I have tried to go along as much as possible with the directives of Vatican II and the directives from Rome, but I must say that I do it in different ways. I mean, I'm not adamantly against the tabernacle being in a central location. I've done that in a number of places. I've also done it where it's in a side chapel. So I don't think it's something that should be a fixed placement. It's a question of, is it accomplishing in the particular place, in a particular building and community, is it accomplishing the importance of its present.
Well, if there are no more questions, let's thank Art. I'm sorry.
This, I guess, would be to both of you. If there's, as one would say, there's no accounting for taste, kind of thing. Is there a way in which a kind of disenchantedness, or as Greg, perhaps as you're saying, that there's just a lack of education, perhaps, in terms of what it seems both of you are talking about, which is modernism really brought to our attention the idea of medium specificity, and the way that the medium, and if you have an awareness of the medium and its tradition, that really can go a long way to helping the viewer of the art to appreciate it more and to understand it as part of the tradition. And I wondered if there's a way in which that education of medium and how medium is important can come about in the United States. I mean, that seems to be a kind of a gargantuan task.
Again, it's something I really have struggled with, how difficult it is to find appreciation for that, using a profound respect for the medium. But if you look back through the history of art, in the antiquity in Egypt, and there was a tremendous amount of high regard for exactly using the medium in its true form, not making something look like something else. And I think maybe you're an artist, and if you are, I think it's your job just to promote it. I try to promote it the best I can, but it's a tough battle.
I think that question really raises a lot of interesting issues. I'll just sketch a couple quick ones. There are people who approach modern art with a kind of hostility, a belief that it is somehow tainted by a rebellion against the past. Now, I've made a little argument based on Gilson that might in fact be somewhat reversed without too much trouble, like a jiu-jitsu flip. But we're very deeply educated into an idea of what is traditional versus what is radical. And a lot of people are very alienated from the modern era because they see it as tainted by chaos, anarchy, sex, all these sorts of issues that, of course, they have been. I mean, there's no doubt about it that it's been a very chaotic period in modernity, and there's a lot of reason for people to have grown alienated from the world of modern art. But unfortunately, a lot of people throw the baby out with the bathwater. They really don't want to make distinctions. So there's a notion, for example, that that sincerity and transparency and earnestness are important. And therefore, the way some people translate that is sincerity, earnestness, relevance to the real means being more photographic, being more the way things look. And I think that is maybe understandable, but itself is part of a pathology of a divisiveness in modern consciousness that is unhealthy, and it's very difficult at times to get people to understand that is not always the case. That art, Picasso said, art is the lie that tells the truth, and artifice, the beauty of artifice, of the artificiality of art, is part of what its glory is all about. And to not understand that is to not understand art. It's to reduce art to propaganda, merely a conduit for some message, for some other thing. But a truly sacramental understanding of art understands that the form, as Bill was saying, the form itself is part of the meaning. And so medium is part of form. Medium is part of how we come to understand things. And this process of re-education is just a very difficult one, because there's so many things that I mean, just to give you the most, vibrant example that I can think of, I mean, people look upon something like Michelangelo's Pietà as the most classic, revered, most pious of all works of religious art. They have no idea that there were practically riots in the streets of Europe when that was unveiled, that an artist would, depict the Virgin Mary as being as young or younger than the son that she cradles in her arms, that she was beautiful, almost erotic. People forget that at the end of his life, when Michelangelo was atoning for all his past sins, he specifically retracted that work. I retract the Pietà as a work of wanton, lack of control and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of a challenge in aesthetic re-education, and it's a tough thing. But people like Maritain and Gilson gave us a language that I think people who appreciate thinkers like that ethically, philosophically, ecclesiologically ought to appreciate those thinkers aesthetically as well. And an institution like this, I think, all the more so.
Just to expand a little bit on what Greg said, there's a distinction that I think is helpful for people. There's tradition and there's traditionalism. And tradition is not this particular style. The tradition is the movement from one thing to another over the centuries of the faith. And traditionalism is sort of standing on the present and living in the past, whereas tradition is standing on the present and living and looking to the future. And a good example, like one Greg mentioned, is if you look up the word Gothic in the dictionary, it's barbarian. And we don't realize what a revolution that was when the barbarians from the north came down with a type of stonework that would let the light in. But it was not welcomed at all. It was considered the barbarian's thing. Today it's our most respected form of architecture.
Do we have time for one more question? All right, this is a tough question to ask, but I have to ask it because I'm really interested in it. The last session we attended involved a presenter who was presenting and defending the Piss Christ painting, which was in Cincinnati. I think it didn't it go through Cincinnati at a certain point? I thought maybe it did. Anyhow, certainly we're exploring new media with art, and presumably the artist claims to be a devout Catholic, certainly working in that tradition. And I would just like to know from both of you what you make of that piece. Is that an acceptable piece of art or not, and why?
He's asking about the work called Piss Christ. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
The Andre Serrano photograph. What you think of it?
Yeah.
Is it a good work of art or not?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that from some points of view it's not a successful work of art. For me, it is not a successful work of art. But it is cleverly done and by an artist of some repute. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a mistaken piece.
All right, you're putting me on the line here. I don't think it's a great work of art. I don't think it's an obscenity in and of itself. It comes out of a series of pieces that he did in which various aspects of his bodily nature, fluids, body parts, and nature are related to certain things that are very important in his life. And there's nothing about the work that, if you back off for a moment that it's a crucifix in urine, there's nothing about the work that seems to me to be screaming overtly, I am mocking something. It's a work of shimmering beauty, there's a kind of beauty of color, beauty of translucency, beauty of this form, and if the concept itself offends you, then of course you're going to be offended. But if you back off for a moment and say, what is the relationship between Christ and the body, between Christ as incarnate in flesh and our individual sense of ourselves as bodies, then I think there's a reason to at least be challenged by the work, if not to be immediately won over by the work. Christ was incarnate, and the most typical danger for most Christians in the world is to disincarnate Christ, to make him abstract, outside of our human experience, some ethereal figure or authority figure rather than our brother. And so in that sense, I think the work offers a challenge rather than merely an offense. Is it a really great work of art? I don't think it has the depth and complexity of a really great work of art, but I don't feel that it was intended, as I understand it, to be merely another example of modern art mocking religious faith. That's the best balanced approach I can bring to it.
All right, let's thank both of our... Oh, very quickly, please.
I have a question for, a question for each of you. Mr. Schickel, how does your work, sort of building off the last question, how does your work sort of enter into the same dialogue of work as Robert Mapplethorpe's, as work like the Piss Christ in the artist community at whole? And then also, Mr. Wolfe, how does, similar question, how does that, how does his work play in the art community? Work of William Schickel, paintings like Marriage, also with, as an artist, finding work, finding places to display your artwork.
Could you just repeat the first question to Bill that you asked? How does it relate to Schickel, Mapplethorpe and Serrano?
With the artist community in, if the artist is a part of a community, does he also, partake in a dialogue with the larger artist community as a whole?
Okay. He's asking whether or not the artist's work participates in a dialogue not only with the regular community but with the artistic community. How does your work participate in artistic dialogue with other artists, including artists as controversial as Serrano and Mapplethorpe?
I've never known personally Serrano or Mapplethorpe, so I haven't got a clue what they think about my work. But I have to tell you that my life has been such that the community that I share in belief in Catholicism has not been as welcome to the quality of my work as the secular art community. So I've sort of lived on that railing where those I admire most in the religious field often reject me, and those who I admire most in the art field often accept me.
I don't know that I have much to add. It's an interesting question, perhaps worthy of a whole session unto itself. The visual arts community as a community is probably the most aggressively secular in the country. I mean, I think compared to music or literature, for example, there has been a cult of the bad boy, a cult of I mean, the visual arts have given in, I think, most readily to the artist as romantic genius. The you know, and there's an element of truth to this, because I think the artist can act as a prophet, and I tried to write about this, but don't forget that a prophet, in at least the biblical sense, lived in a very close proximity to his community, and there was a kind of dialogue between prophet and community. You know, sometimes it was the community kicking the prophet the heck out of town, but there was still, you know, a belief in a kind of a wrestling, a grappling between those two. this kind of the sort of cult of the genius in modern art has led there to be a true break from between the realm of the artist and the larger community, and that is unhealthy. And that's certainly, I mean, I'm not. Believe me, I'm not trying to make some line like everything modern, everything, the latest thing is the best thing, and modernity is wonderful, and so on and so forth. I mean, it is a very confused world out there, and a very wounded world. And Bill's work, I think, probably, really has been best appreciated in the art world. It represents the other side of that dichotomy. The dichotomy of the estrangement of the religious community from the currents of contemporary art. So you've got two bad situations. You've got the secular world with the cult of the genius and the shocker, and you've got the religious world, which is trying to be, pious and religious and moral and traditional, and yet, unfortunately, playing right into a very dead traditionalism and not a living spiritual tradition. And so the forces that are trying to maintain piety are maintaining aesthetic structures and images that in which the spirit flees, and ironically are undermining their own goal of keeping the spirit alive. So it really is a tough atmosphere out there, but guys like this, they're the models.
We're going to have to stop there. Please join me in thanking both of our speakers.